I never thought I'd be the one standing in a glass office overlooking the world, holding the power to fire the very man who once spit on my shoes for being a charity case. But here I am, and honestly, was I wrong for orchestrating his absolute downfall? Tell me, if you had been beaten down, humiliated, and told you were nothing but trash for 18 years, would you have shown mercy? Or would you have done exactly what I did and burnt their entire world to the ground just to build your empire on the ashes? I'm the CEO of the Nike empire now, a name that commands respect globally, but my life didn't start with polished floors and designer suits. It started in a cramped, leaking apartment where the smell of damp cardboard was the only thing we truly owned. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, and I remember wearing the same pair of shoes for 3 years straight. Shoes that were held together by duct tape and prayers. School was a nightmare because kids can be monsters, and they smelled poverty on me like a scent. There was this one guy, Julian, whose father was a high-level executive at the regional office. Julian had everything: the newest sneakers every week, the expensive clothes, and a heart made of pure ice. One afternoon in the cafeteria, he tripped me while I was carrying my tray, and as I scrambled to pick up my meager lunch, he laughed and told the whole school that trash belongs on the floor. He looked at my taped-up, nameless sneakers and said I'd be lucky to even be his janitor one day. That moment changed something inside me. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was a cold, hard resolve. I spent every waking hour studying, working part-time jobs, and learning everything I could about business and design because I realized that in this world, money wasn't just currency, it was armor. The winter nights were the hardest, sitting under a single dim bulb in our kitchen, my fingers frozen as I sketched shoe designs on the back of old grocery receipts. I didn't just want to wear nice shoes. I wanted to create the shoes that the world would chase after. Every time my stomach growled from hunger, I whispered to myself that one day, I wouldn't just eat well, I'd own the table everyone else was eating at. My mother would come home at 2 a.m., her hands cracked and bleeding from cleaning office buildings, and she'd see me still awake. She never told me to stop. She just kissed my forehead and told me I was born for more than this. That fueled me. The hunger wasn't just in my stomach. It was in my soul, a gnawing, persistent ache that reminded me every single second that I was at the bottom of the food chain. I remember one specific night when the power got cut off because we were $20 short. We sat in the dark, and my mother cried silently, thinking I was asleep. That was the last time I ever let myself feel helpless. I started walking 3 miles to the public library every single day after school, not to read comics, but to study the biographies of titans like Phil Knight and Steve Jobs. I realized that the only difference between me and them was opportunity and time, and I was going to manufacture both. I spent months teaching myself the intricacies of supply chains and logistics, reading outdated textbooks until I knew them by heart. I'd watch the wealthy parents drop their kids off in luxury SUVs, observing their mannerisms, how they carried themselves and how they spoke. I was a social chameleon in training, learning a language I wasn't born into. I got into a decent college on a full scholarship, surviving on ramen and sheer spite. While other kids were partying, I was cold calling, networking, and building a small reselling business that eventually turned into a consultancy. I spent my weekends at thrift stores, buying ruined sneakers, restoring them with professional tools I'd saved months to buy, and flipping them for 10 times the price. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a masterclass in value creation. I learned how to turn something discarded into something desired. I became a ghost in the halls of my university, always present but never part of the social scene. I didn't have time for friends who wouldn't be there when the bills were due. I remember the rich kids in my dorm complaining about their fathers only giving them $1,000 monthly allowance, and I'd have to bite my tongue so hard it bled. They had no idea what it was like to calculate the cost of a single egg, or to walk to class in the rain, because you couldn't afford the bus fare. I climbed the corporate ladder with a ferocity that scared people. I started as an unpaid intern at a design firm, taking the tasks no one else wanted. I'd stay until midnight, analyzing market trends and consumer psychology until my eyes burned. I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was working to become the person who could never be tripped again. I moved through the ranks like a predator. While my peers were focused on work-life balance, I was focused on total market domination. I worked through pneumonia, I worked through holidays, and I worked through the loneliness that comes with being obsessed. I remember one Christmas I spent entirely alone in a cubicle, eating a cold sandwich, just so I could finish a proposal that would save a failing shoe line. That proposal was what finally got me noticed by the upper echelons of the Nike empire. They didn't see a poor kid from the slums. They saw a ruthless visionary who knew exactly what the streets wanted because he had lived on them. I was the bridge between high-end luxury and the raw energy of the urban market. By the time I reached my late 30s, I had built a reputation as a turnaround specialist. The guy you call when a brand is dying and needs a miracle. I moved from company to company, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, but I always kept my eye on the ultimate prize. The Nike empire. It was the summit of the mountain, the place where Julian's father had reigned, and where Julian now worked as a senior manager thanks to his family's deep-rooted connections. I spent years perfecting my craft, building a portfolio that was undeniable, and waiting for the moment the board of directors would be desperate enough to look outside their typical circle of Ivy League legacy hires. I had to be 10 times better than anyone else just to get a seat at the table. I studied Julian from afar, tracking his career through industry news and corporate filings. He hadn't changed. He was still the same entitled brat, riding on his father's coattails, failing upwards because of the old boys club. It disgusted me, but it also gave me an advantage. I knew his weaknesses better than he did. I knew he was lazy, I knew he was sloppy, and I knew he felt untouchable. He was the kind of person who thought he was the smartest person in the room just because his name was on the building's historical plaque. Fast forward 15 years of blood, sweat, and strategic moves, and I found myself in the running for the top spot. The irony? Julian's father had retired with a golden parachute, and Julian had used his connections to get a middle management position in the same company, thinking his daddy's name would protect him forever. He didn't recognize me when I walked in for my final board review because the scrawny kid in duct-tape shoes was gone, replaced by a man in a $5,000 suit with a gaze that could cut through steel. I had spent thousands on speech coaching, skincare, and tailoring to ensure that not a single trace of the trash remained on the surface. But underneath, the fire was still burning. The day of the final board interview, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't see myself. I saw every person who had ever looked down on me. I saw the cafeteria floor. I saw the duct tape on my shoes. I saw my mother's tired eyes. I walked into that boardroom and spoke with a level of authority that left no room for doubt. I didn't just tell them how to sell shoes. I told them how to sell an identity, a dream of escaping your circumstances. They were mesmerized. I was hired on the spot. I played the long game, watching him from the executive level as he slacked off, bullied his subordinates, and embezzled small amounts of company funds, thinking he was untouchable. I'd see him in the hallways, laughing with his cronies, still the same arrogant bully who thought the world owed him everything. He even tried to suck up to me once in the elevator, not knowing he was talking to the boy whose life he tried to ruin. He joked about the poor's complaining about inflation, and I just nodded, my heart turning to stone. I saw him belittle a young intern for bringing him the wrong coffee, and it took everything in me not to end him right then and there. But I waited. I needed the evidence to be airtight. I needed his destruction to be absolute. I started an internal investigation under the guise of corporate restructuring. I looked into every expense report, every vendor contract, and every travel voucher Julian had ever signed. It was a goldmine of corruption. He had been using company funds to pay for luxury vacations, high-end dinners, and even his personal car lease. He thought he was being clever, hiding the expenses under client entertainment, but he was just arrogant. I gathered every receipt, every email, and every witness statement from the staff he had mistreated. I had enough to put him away for a long time. I spent nights meticulously organizing the data, creating a timeline of his greed that would be impossible to refute. I even found out he was leaking confidential designs to a competitor for kickbacks. That was the final nail in the coffin. I waited until the perfect moment, the moment when I was officially named CEO and my power was absolute, to call him into my office. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire life and watched him realize who I was, I want you to stop and think about the weight of that revenge. I had the choice to be the bigger person and just let him be, Or I could make sure he felt every bit of the shame he put me through. What would you have done? Would you have let the past go? Or would you have made sure he paid for every tear your mother cried while working those 3 jobs? Before I reveal the climax, I want you to pause right now. Think about that one person who told you that you would never amount to anything. If you had their entire future in your hands, would you crush it or set it free? Comment justice if you'd crush it, or mercy if you'd let it go. I need to know your perspective before I tell you what happened next. Is revenge a dish best served cold? Or is it a poison that consumes the person who seeks it? Let me know in the comments before we get to the final confrontation. When Julian walked into my office, he was arrogant, leaning back in the chair and asking what the boss wanted with a lowly manager like him. He even had the audacity to ask for a promotion, citing his father's legacy at the company. I didn't say a word. I just took a pair of old duct-tape sneakers out of a drawer and set them on the mahogany desk. The room went silent. The ticking of the clock seemed to amplify. He looked at the shoes, then at me, then back at the shoes. I saw the gears turning, the memory surfacing like a drowned corpse. The color drained from his face slowly, like a ghost was taking over his body. We sat on the balcony of her new home, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. The aftermath for Julian was a total collapse. His father disowned him to save his own reputation, and Julian ended up working a minimum wage job just to pay his legal fees. He lost his house, his car, and all his friends who only liked him for his money. He became exactly what he used to mock. I heard later that he tried to sue me for wrongful termination, but the evidence was so overwhelming that no lawyer would take his case. He's now a shell of a man, living in a studio apartment smaller than my bathroom, haunted by the ghost of the boy he once tripped. Today, I lead this empire with a focus on helping kids who come from where I did, making sure they have the tools to succeed without being bullied for their bank accounts. I've launched scholarship programs and design workshops in the poorest neighborhoods, because I know that the next CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company might be wearing taped-up shoes right now. I've personally visited schools to tell my story, showing those kids that their current circumstances are just a starting line, not a finish line. Every time I see a kid in worn-out sneakers, I don't see a victim. I see a future titan. I tell them that their struggle is their greatest strength, a forge that will make them harder than any silver spoon brat. Julian is gone, his family name is tarnished, and I am the proof that where you start doesn't define where you finish. If you think I was right to take my revenge and build my empire out of spite, then hit that like button to show your support. This journey from the dirt to the boardroom wasn't easy, but it was worth every second of the struggle. It took years of silence, years of being the underdog, and years of planning, but standing here now, I can finally breathe. The pain of the past didn't break me. It forged me into something unbreakable. I look out of my office window every morning and remember that kid in the cafeteria. And I smile because I didn't just survive, I conquered. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories of people who turned their pain into power. And don't forget to share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was I a hero or just as cold as he was? I'll see you all in the next story.